All right, so today is going to be our second to last class. I'm going to say this again at the end of class, so remind me to say this at the end of class. Basically, next class, we officially have class. However, I know a lot of you simply come to campus to come to this class. Therefore, I'm not going to make everyone who travels come to campus just for like a 15-minute chat. So I'm going to run as usual. I'm not even going to probably take attendance, but if you're somebody who does come in, so I'm mostly talking to people right now. If you're somebody who usually comes in, feel extra free not to come in. If you're already here and it's easier for you, I will be here, but no pressure whatsoever if it's easier to do it from home, because it's only going to be like a 15-minute chat in which I answer any general questions you have about papers or anything like that. I ask you to grade me. And yeah, that'll be that. So other business stuff. My last class, it turned out that I think a third of them had done the outline assignment. And generally, if only a third of a class has done an assignment, the deadline is not a good deadline. And so I take full responsibility for that. So I'm pushing the deadline back to officially Thursday at 9 a.m. If you haven't done the outline assignment, I'm going to start grading them Thursday at 9 a.m. If you haven't turned in the thesis assignment yet, I'm not going to be able to give you feedback on it just because the outline ones are coming in, but turn it in. I'm going to have to take off 10 points for lateness, but you'll still get 90 out of 100, which is, yeah. So you're fine on that. So turn in the thesis assignment by this time, you'll get 90%, but no feedback. Turn in the outline assignment if you haven't had a chance, Thursday by 9 a.m. I will give you feedback on it. If you have an exemption or you've reached out to me with needing an extension separate from this, that one overrides this, so you have whatever extra time you need. Also, if you want to grade me, I'd say grade, like just fill out the teacher evaluation form. You can go here. It helps the department because they make sure that I'm competent enough to keep teaching. It helps me because if I do okay, then they give me more classes. And you can sometimes win prizes. I don't know if they're doing that this year, but it takes like 10 minutes if you want to fill out bubbles. Again, no pressure. And you're allowed to say whatever you want because they're anonymous. I mean, you can sign them if you choose to, but everything is anonymous. And if you have any ideas about ways that I could improve the class or things that you think worked well, there's little bubbles or like little comment section you can include. So if you want to do that, that's there. I will probably bother you about them because my chair bothers me to bother you about them. So when he says jump, I say, okay. All right, so that's that. We have class Thursday, as I said. Unless you're already on campus, you can do it from Zoom. Like no point coming in. It's literally just going to be like a goodbye and any questions that you might have and stuff like that. But today is going to be our final topic of like substance, which is when writing a paper, how do you turn a plan for any sort of argumentative paper? How do you turn a plan into a paper? And I think there's a lot of ways in which this is the easiest part of paper writing. And in a lot of ways, it's the hardest part of paper writing. So I say it's the easiest because once you have a plan, you always have something you can refer back to. You're not starting from scratch. You've got an outline. You can always go, oh, I walk away, I go to the bathroom, I get a snack, I fall asleep. I forget where I was. Well, I always can go back and look at my plan and be like, oh, this is the paragraph in which I'm defining my terms, or this is the part in which I'm giving my first reason. So you'll always have something to fall back on. Why do I say it's the hardest bit, though? Well, it's because it's the way in which there are many, many ways to do this well and many, many ways to do something poorly. And there's no recipe for being able to tell in detail whether you're doing it right or wrong. And I can't, like with the first paragraph, I can give you like a recipe. If you do this, then you do this. These sorts of arguments, it's all I can do is give a general description that I think is a good way of approaching it and give some examples of how one might approach a very particular instance of turning a part of your plan into a paper, but I can't give you a formula that, like, there's no silver bullet for the right way to write. I'm going to also give some tips and things that I think are helpful, but again, there's no silver bullet to writing good argumentative papers. But generally speaking, though, what you're going to want to do is once you've got your first paragraph written and you've got your plan, the next step is asking yourself, how do I turn a plan, which is going to be like a sentence description of what you're going to want to do, into a full-length paragraph or full-length section. And I think generally speaking, the easiest way to think about what you have to do is when you're writing a paragraph or a section or a part, ask yourself or make sure when you're writing what you're trying to do in a very broad brushstroke sort of description is you want your reader to do three things at the end of when you finish this paragraph. One, or this part or this section. One, they know exactly what you mean. So it's not just a matter of you've said some true things, but rather what you've said is so clear that anybody is going to understand what you mean. The second thing is they can understand why what you're saying is the truth. Not just that you've said something true that's clear, but why they should accept it's true. And the third thing is they understand how this fits into the overall structure of your paper. So if you have a part about what privacy is, or a part about what freedom of speech is, not just that it's clear what you mean, but rather that they also know why are we bringing up this notion of free speech in this particular paper. So that's the very broad general level of what you're trying to do. But you can see these are very general statements. And what counts as knowing exactly what you mean is going to change depending on what it is you're talking about. What it takes to explain exactly what cultural relativism is going to take more than explaining exactly what privacy is. They're different concepts. The sorts of things to do are going to be different. So there's no silver bullet of this is exactly what you need to do. What it's going to take to prove that something is true is going to change depending on what it is you're trying to prove. So what I want to do now is, once you've all had a chance to copy this down, and I'm not going to erase it, but I'm going to pull this down and we're going to try to do this convoluted, fancy projecting and screen sharing and everything else. So let's see if I can get this to work. Yeah. I'm just like, language has become beyond me at this point in the semester. I just have been making like strange animal noises. Display on projector. Let's see. All right, computer people, just wait 1 second as the projector warms up. And then once the projector warms up, I will share this screen. Oh, I'm completely in the way of those of you on the computer who are trying to see what that says. Okay, that's coming up. My computer people, have you copied everything you need to from this for the time being? Can I share my screen with you?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay, computer people, you're about to get your screen shared. Oh, that's not the, what am I trying to share? Oh, I need a different, that's what the issue is. Where's the Google Doc I want? Okay, so that's the blank one. Zoom, share screen, that one. All right, there should be a blank Google Doc, computer people, correct? Is there a blank Google Doc in front of you?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Can you still hear me, computer people? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I can also just move you closer, which would make more sense. I'll take you with me. All right, this way I won't have to shout at everyone. All right, people, can I pull this down so you can now see my blank doc?
Yes.
All right. And I'll also shut off the front light so you can see a little bit better. There we go. Okay, so let us see if this works. So what I want to do now is just give an example in which we have a reason for an imaginary topic. And how would you turn this reason into a series of, well, into something that satisfies the know exactly what you mean, understand why, the reader can understand why what you're saying is true, or at least well supported, and can understand how it fits in. So let's go back to our question, our imaginary prompt from a couple classes ago of, is New York City the best city in the United States? And let's just imagine that our thesis is, yes, it is. And is this successfully showing up? No, I want to make sure. Oh, yes, it's showing up on both. Yay, it's working. So I'm just very excited that I've figured out how to do this. Yes, it is. And now imagine that the first reason we have is New York City is I don't know, what's a good reason we could give? What is one reason to say that, yes, New York is the best city in the United States?
The best food.
Okay, New York City has the best food. So this right here, this New York City has the best food, is going to be our first reason that New York is the best. So the first thing you ask yourself is, my reason is New York has the best food. And the first question you then ask yourself is, actually, you know what, let me copy this over. So it's right in front of us. Where are my 3 points? Give me 1 second, everybody, as no, what? Wait, I can't copy and paste.
Oh, you have to do it with like this.
Yeah, the actual, yeah.
What the? Why?
It's also like that on Blackboard. You can't just copy and paste.
Yeah.
What is this shenanigans? I hate this so much. All right. So, and then what was our third thing? Understand how. All right. I'm just trying to get this so everyone can see them at once, even those of you who can't see the board, which is hidden behind me. So, AKA everybody. All right. How things being true helps prove the thesis. Understand precisely. Okay. So when think. What do I need to do to make sure the reader can see why they should think what I'm saying is true? All right, so you now have in front of you this reason New York City has the best food. And what we're trying to do is understand precisely what that means, see what they, the reader, why they, the reader, should think that the fact that New York has the best food is actually true, and then also understand how this notion of New York having the best food fits in with the overall argument. So the first thing you're going to do is ask yourself, all right, best is a very general term. What does one mean when they say the best food? So how would we turn this general idea into something more concrete that I could write down in paragraph form? Netta?
There's a lot of diverse
So yeah, so one thing you'd say, so if we were turning this into a paragraph, you'd start off with New York has the best food. That is your reason. And then you can follow that up with more precisely, New York has the largest diversity of food in the United States.
Is it true though? I don't know.
I actually think it probably is true, just because I think outside of Toronto, New York has the largest ethnic mix of every North American city. So my guess is this is the case. Or if you don't want to say this, New York had, even if you don't want to quite say the largest, you could just say something a little more general, like a huge diversity of food. More than nearly all other cities in the United States. So that way you could kind of hedge your bet. So you don't want to say things that are false. But all right, so we've now got this. However, is somebody who's never been to New York going to know, like, are they going to know that what you're saying is true? Are they going to necessarily know that it's true that New York has a huge variety of food? No. So what are you going to have to do to this point for them to see that what you're saying is true? What sorts of things are you going to want to bring up? Yeah, so, and what sorts of facts? What sorts of, like, if we were to look this up, we could look up like how many different, or what sorts of, if we can't give a direct thing without doing some research, what sorts of facts would we put here? Like, what sorts of particular facts could one use to prove that New York has much more variety of food than other cities? What sort of things would you bring up? And again, I'm not expecting you to know the numbers, but Lauren.
Oh, just like, like in Queens, it has all of these different ethnicities that they actually.
Yeah, so what you could do is literally just list off facts about the number of different ethnic foods that are in New York City. So you could give examples like, for instance, New York is one of the few places where you can find an Ethiopian restaurant next to a Korean restaurant, next to a Vietnamese restaurant. Like, you could do this, or you could do something like, if you wanted to do a little research, you could look up something like, for instance, Philadelphia has blank number of different types of food, while New York City has blank bigger number. So those are the sorts of things that you'd include here. So we could say something like, for instance, in Queens, you can find a large variety of Chinese food, while, and fill in the blank. I'm not going to like write this all out here, but that's the sort of thing you'd be doing. So what this is, this first sentence is your very broad general reason you're trying to go with. Then this next sentence is explaining exactly what you mean. And then this third is explaining why the general thing you've said is true. So this is what I mean by these sorts of things. Now, the last thing you have now is somebody going to necessarily understand why you're bringing this up if you just jump straight in with New York has the best food. No, they're not necessarily going to. So what are you going to want to include at the start of this? What was that special sort of silly sentence that I love jumping up and down about? Yeah, signpost. So you put a signpost like, the first reason to think that NYC is the best city is that New York City has the best food, blah, 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 blah. We fill all of this in. And then you can finish with something like, the reason that this diversity in food makes New York the best is that a city with a lot of food variety, that a person living in a city with many types of food is far more likely to experience different cultures and to not get bored of eating the same thing. So that right there is how we could turn a single sentence of New York has the best food as our reason into a longer paragraph. So this is what you're trying to do in the paper. You're basically, each thing you're trying to explain exactly what you mean, why what you're saying is true, and then explaining to the reader how that helps prove your bigger thesis point. And that's all that it is. So in some sense, it's simple. In another sense, it's very complicated because what counts as doing it well and everything else is changing from case to case to case. Neta.
Is the example you gave with the first sentence, would that be like an actual example of like how we can write it in paper?
Yeah. Would be a perfectly good signpost and a perfectly good paragraph to include in a paper. Computer people, my internet or my thing is claiming that my internet is unstable. Can you still hear me? Am I still coming through, internet people?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, just making sure. You could then think about, just to give another example, rather than just finishing it here, let's imagine our same imaginary utilitarian prompt where I'm claiming that because utilitarianism is true, the right thing to do is shove a stranger in front of a train to save people. You might not agree with it, but imagine that's our thesis. And imagine we've got that paragraph in which we have to define what utilitarianism is. I want to bring this one up because it shows kind of the importance of understanding precisely what you mean. And I'm going to type this up. It's the difference between saying true things and explaining precisely what you mean. And there's a difference here, and it's important that you do the latter one in an argumentative paper. So imagine I'm writing this paper on utilitarianism, and I started off with a nice signpost like, however, before we begin, it's necessary to define utilitarianism because I will be drawing on it later. Utilitarianism Utilitarianism is an ethical theory, period. This right here, that final statement, utilitarianism is an ethical theory. That is a true statement. It is an ethical theory. But would somebody know exactly what utilitarianism is or what it means just on this statement? No, so that's the key, is you don't just want to stop here. This is a fine thing to include, but you need to keep going until somebody reading this would know what it is you're talking about. So this is where it's so important to put yourself into the mind of the reader. What would a reader need to know to not just know true things about utilitarianism, but to grasp it so that later on when you're talking about it, they'll be able to follow along with what you say? Well, you're probably going to want to say something like, well, what are we going to want to say about utilitarianism? Semi-fake, not actually a pop quiz, but let's send our vegetable minds that have been destroyed by the semester back to a few weeks ago. What is the utilitarian thing? What?
Where it's they're looking at what will make everyone's society happiest. So it's not about the individual, but it's more about everyone's overall happiness.
Utilitarianism is an ethical theory according to which the right thing to do is the one that causes the most happiness. Now, this right here, again, true statement, and this is much closer to 100% accurate. But something you should always assume, and I'm going to type it up, assume your reader is lazy, stupid, and mean. So if you assume your reader is lazy, stupid, and mean, then this is going to get them much closer to the truth. But if they are that lazy and stupid, they might still not really know what's going on here. So you want to hit them over the head. And you basically, the way I think about writing a paper is you're not trying to just say something where somebody might be able to accept what you're saying. You're trying to hit them over the head with your reasons so much that by the end, even the laziest, stupidest, meanest reader is going to have no choice but to accept that what you're saying is pretty smart, or that what you're saying is a good reason. And this is really like, if you achieve that level of clarity, you've achieved a paper that is very easy to follow along with. So the next thing you're going to want to do here is, so for instance, one thing you can do, and this is just to explain it better, but a very useful way of explaining a general statement to an imaginary stupid reader is to include an example. So you could say something like, for instance, a utilitarian would say that torture is wrong because it causes a huge amount of pain to the victim, so much that it offsets any knowledge you gain. That would be a way in which you take a particular example and you expand on this general statement in such a way that even a lazy, stupid, mean reader knows exactly what you're talking about. And that's what the value of examples are in this sort of case. So this right here is the level of detail that you want to be going into. You want to ensure that a reader not only can get a general gist, or that the professor who's reading it has some idea that you know generally what's going on. You rather want to put so much detail that I know that you know it inside and out. And not only that, when you come back later to bring up these key terms. So if you're writing about free speech and later on you've defined it earlier in a lot of depth and given an example, then later on, the reader who, I mean, if I'm a lazy, stupid, mean reader who doesn't know this stuff, I will have the knowledge necessary to follow along. But even if I'm a professor who's reading 90 papers and become somewhat of a vegetable, if I can even follow along, if you're the 90th paper and I'm still able to follow along, then you've given me the level of, because I will forget what free speech is by the end of grading 90 papers. Like, I will just be completely gone. So if you can include that level of detail, you've reached the point in which I am able to follow along, and that's really what you want to be going for. So that is really what you're doing to turn a general idea into a paragraph that's part of a section that's part of an argument. Does all of this make somewhat sense to everybody? Computer people, does all of this make sense? We doing all right?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to stop the general ways you should think about these paper writing things. So I'm gonna move these Control X. Control. Okay. So these are the general ways to think of it, but there are some useful tips and tricks that I think can be helpful when working on a paper. And these are things, and this is why I say it's an art, not a science for paper writing. Oh, you all can see my entire class notes because I'm sharing this. So this is not, I forgot that I was sharing that, so that doesn't look as good. Okay, let me pull this up. I'm running too many screens right now. I feel like a crazy person. All right, so I also feel like I'm flying like the Starship Enterprise right now with all these ridiculous things. All right, useful tips and tricks. So what I want to talk about now are things that none of these are the silver bullet, but they're different ways that you can go about ensuring that these three major goals are accomplished at all points. Number one, oh, where's the little thing that I can just have it make the bullets for me? There we go. Signposts. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Signposts are a very, very useful way of, actually zoom in a little bit. So signposts are a very, very useful way of ensuring that somebody can follow along with what you're doing. So whenever you start a new paragraph, include a thing that explains in the first sentence how what you're saying provides evidence for the thesis. Another thing to do is don't be afraid of using phrases like, the reason this is important is, or this is significant because, or I'm bringing this up because. So after you've said something that's kind of general, or you've brought up an example, include a sentence that's just like afterwards, just you say exactly to your stupid reader why you're bringing this up. So for instance, if you bring up the example of, let me think of a way in which we could bring this up. So in your New York City, if you're writing on New York City and you bring up the 76 different types of ethnic food you've eaten in New York, your dumb reader might forget, why are we listing off different types of ethnic foods? Well, you now explain, I bring up all these different types of ethnic foods to demonstrate just how diverse New York City food actually is. And so those sorts of, this shows that blah, 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 or I bring this up because blah, blah, blah. Those sorts of claims and statements, one, they do two things. One, make it a lot easier for the reader. Two, help you understand your thesis. And three, the other nice thing is when you're including this level of detail, there's not all that much you have to cover in a paper or many different creative ideas. You can get to 2-3 pages pretty quickly if you go into enough detail. So if you're wondering like, oh my God, how am I going to come up with 3 reasons? If you go into enough detail, you can get by with 1 reason and have it be a kick-ass paper, as long as you're explaining every step of the way. So that's why I hesitate to say how many reasons you need, because it comes down to how much detail you go into. And this is back to the, it's hard to give a silver bullet answer, is how much detail you need depends on what you're talking about and how much you imagine an imaginary dumb reader needing to understand what you're saying. So those are the first 2 things. I also use examples. So when you bring up an example, the reason examples are good is that examples are, generally speaking, the way the human mind works is we have an easier time grasping a particular instance and seeing the significance of it more so than a general statement. So for instance, if we had the thesis of what's better, cats or dogs, and one of your reasons is dogs are more loyal, I can just say something very general like dogs are more loyal. They do a lot of loyal things. Well, that's true. They do a lot of loyal things, but that's not as good of an illustration that a reader's going to know exactly what you mean than if you say something like this: dogs are more loyal. For instance, one time I scraped my knee very badly and my pet dog came over and licked up the blood. That right there is a much more, like, it illustrates the point very clearly. A heartless, mean-spirited cat wouldn't ever lick up my blood. That right there is a much more precise, able to get your point across sort of way. So they do a lot of loyal things, while true, is not as successful as giving a particular example. And this one is clearly silly, but like that's the sort of thing you could give. Or if, for instance, if you're talking about, say you're doing the facial recognition prompt, and one of the things you're talking about is with all that data out there, it makes it unsafe for you. Well, saying unsafe is less precise than giving an example of a bad thing that could happen to you thanks to this sort of data. So examples are always a good, useful way of illustrating a point. And it's good to combine your example with the reason I'm including this example is because yada, 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 yada. So, and these are the things I'm bringing up right now are, I'm talking about them in the context of an argumentative paper, but these things apply pretty generally to other sorts of things. Any paper you're writing, examples can be very useful, very helpful. All right, let's see, what else do I have? Oh, quotes. They are good, but make sure to paraphrase them and explain the significance. So, Control C, Control V. It's very useful and it's great for picking quotes. However, everyone other than me and this computer seems to be able to use Control C and Control V. Your cat can do it if you put its paws in the right spot. So the ability to do Control C, Control V does not show complete, I need to scroll this one down. So it doesn't show complete mastery of a topic. So in order to do that, you have to paraphrase it. And what does it mean to paraphrase something?
Say it in your own.
Yeah, just say it in your own words. So in, December 7th, 1941 is a day that will live in infamy. By this, Franklin Delano Roosevelt meant that Americans and people around the world are not going to forget Pearl Harbor anytime soon. That's what it would mean to paraphrase. Just put the quote into your own words. And the reason you do that is, one, if you include both a quote and a paraphrase, it makes it easier for a dumb reader to know exactly what you mean because you've given them two versions of the same thing. Second, it helps you, the reader, you, the writer, demonstrate that you fully understand it. And also then you can say something like, and the reason I'm bringing this up is blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. All right. Those are the big sorts of things in terms of how to accomplish these big three goals of, these are just the useful tips and tricks for accomplishing these general things. Now what I want to do is just talk about some very particular tricks and tips. And the particular very particular tips and tricks. Little words are your friends. If you're talking about taxes, just say taxes. You don't have to say revenue enhancements. If you're talking about something being good, just say it's good. You don't have to say it has an overall positive valence. Little words are good because they're easier for a reader to understand. I know there's this stupid tendency in modern society to use big words because it makes you sound fancy, and somewhere along the line someone came up with the idea that good writing means using big long sentences and big words. It's false. It's about using the words that are appropriate to the situation, and most of the time little words are better than big words. There are times in which a big word captures the idea in a way that a little word cannot. Like there are cases in which like winning doesn't quite capture what achievement does or something like that. So you go with the bigger word. But most of the time, if win is going to get you what you need, go with win. It's simpler. It's easier. You aren't going to get too... What it ends up sounding like sometimes if you use too many big words is like somebody went into like you right click on the word in Microsoft Word and you just picked a few synonyms, and then it just like, it's much harder to follow along with. So just keep it simple. Short sentences are good as well. Don't feel the need to have super giant sentences. It's about keeping it simple for yourself And if it's easier for you to understand, it's easier for the reader to understand. Philosophy papers are one of the papers in which bullshitting is going to least be helpful, because I am trained in the art of recognizing it, and I can tell when what you're saying just is word vomit. And while there are classes in which, you know, you can word vomit and it ends up sounding nice enough to get the job done. I feel like not to throw shade at English departments, but I feel like you can really bullshit a bit with like literary criticism. You can like really get in there and just get the symbolism going and everything. It's much harder in this sort of class. Took a class on fairy tales once and I did a lot of that. It was real fun. So other things, try to keep, very important to try to keep each idea closely grouped up in space on your page. That's a stupid way of saying talk about one thing at a time. So if you have one part, say you're doing the Carl K. Carlson and his neo-Nazi website paper. And the first thing you want to talk about is why it shouldn't be allowed because it causes psychological harm. And the second thing is it's going to lead to violence. Well, you want to keep those two ideas separate. Say everything about psychological harm in one part, then finish it, move on to the next one. What you don't want to do is jump around. So how many of you have listened to a small child describe the plot of their favorite movie? You know that feeling of like, I have no idea what you're talking about because you've jumped around all over the place. That's what happens. That's what the experience is like for the reader if you don't keep things organized. So you don't jump from privacy to security, back to privacy, to data mining, to a story, to keep it one thing at a time. Everything about data mining together in one place, then everything about privacy together in one place. Just keep it organized in that way, and your paper won't end up sounding like the child's explanation of the plot of Frozen. All right, other tips and tricks. Don't be afraid to reread what you wrote to remind yourself of what you're doing. Very often, we just want to get to the end of the paper, but sometimes it is more efficient to get to the end, to go back a couple paragraphs and remind yourself, what the hell am I supposed to be doing in this paragraph? If you remind yourself, then you're less likely to just be stuck. You can go, oh yeah, my game plan told me in this part I'm going to be talking about violence. So, oh, that reminds me I have to talk about violence here. So don't be afraid to go back and see what you talked about before and expand, like just to remind yourself where you are and what you're doing. I am guilty of this. This is one of the ones that I have the most trouble with. I am very guilty of ending up when writing my own papers. I will just be plugging along and then I'll step away and I'll come back and have completely forgot what I did 2 paragraphs before and be in such a rush, I forget to go back and I end up repeating myself and it ends up being a disaster. So to be clear, this is not like I am by no means a perfect writer. These are things, a lot of these are tips I've found useful for myself when trying to write. And a lot of these, again, apply much more generally than argumentative papers. Don't worry about spelling. Don't worry about punctuation. Don't worry too much about grammar. And I say too much. The only thing that matters is that I can figure out what you mean. So if you write, that ain't a good idea because it's stupid as hell, that grammatically wouldn't pass the test of acceptable in like a grammar book. This sentence is great in my book. I'm totally fine with this. Dog, cat, feet, good, smell, up. That is ungrammatical in a way I have no idea what you're talking about. So as long as it's of this first type of know what you're talking about. It ain't a good idea because it's stupid as hell. I know what you mean by that. It's a bad idea because it's not a good one. It's an unintelligent one. Great, I understand. Dog, cat, feet, group, good, smell up, no clue what you're talking about. So as long as you keep them to this type, I'm totally fine with not giving a shit about grammar at all. Also, like, don't worry about, like, I don't care. Feel free to use contractions, first person, anything you want. Whatever allows you to most clearly get your point across. Don't be afraid to go with your gut and try something that seems interesting. What I mean by this is, if you have something you're passionate about, but you're not entirely sure if it ties into the topic, give it a shot. I am willing to let you. The goal of this paper, my number one goal is two things. One, for you to practice writing an argumentative paper, and two, for it to be as unmiserable as is possible for the end of a semester paper to be. So if you have a way in which you want to talk about something that's interesting to you, and you will enjoy the writing process a bit more by going that way, give it a shot. Passion comes through in a paper, and I will be able to tell, and I'm not going to be like, oh, this person didn't back up this thing they're passionate about well enough. I'm going to take that into account and be aware, like, oh, this person took an intellectual risk. That is awesome. They took something they care about. That's awesome. So don't be afraid to do that. Now, of course, if you've got something, you just want to keep it simple, also okay. I'm not going to punish you for it. It's just, if you are a little bit less clear because you took a chance, I will be a little bit more lenient, which ties in with the next one. If English isn't your first language, I will do my absolute damnedest not to punish you for that. What I mean by this is, I will not, like, this ties in somewhat with the grammar stuff, but basically, if you are saying things where it's clear to me that English is not your first language, and because of that, it's somewhat harder for me to follow than it otherwise might have been, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt to the best of my ability. And even if what you're saying isn't 100% accurate, but I can tell that you understand it, you just don't have a complete mastery of the language that somebody who grew up here is. Like, the fact that you happen to be born in someplace other than the United States is not a reason to take off points when you happen to be at college in the United States. So, like, that's another thing. I will do my absolute damnedest to make sure that I give you the benefit of the doubt on those things. So do not put the stressful part, the thing I care about is, can you engage with the ideas? Can you get an argument out? And put anything that will take up brain power from that to the side. Spelling, grammar, all that sort of stuff. Don't worry about it any more than at a base level. Citations. Yes, do them. I don't care how. Which also comes back to sources. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted. Whatever you want. So you are in these papers, a lot of these prompts are things where there are outside sources you could bring in if you so chose. You in no way have to. If you only want to use things that we talked about in class, that is completely fine. If you want to bring up, like, say you're doing something on neo-Nazi websites and you wanted to cite the number of increases in neo-Nazi groups in the past 10 years, and you found an article about it, awesome, you're welcome to include it. And it can help make an argument stronger to include outside sources. But if you include them, just make sure that you include, like, where you got them. And by this, I literally mean just include a URL somewhere on the piece of paper. So if the plagiarism gods come down and say, hey, did this person plagiarize? I can say, no, they didn't. They got it from here. If you want to practice your MLA or your Chicago footnotes or whatever else, feel free to practice them. I won't be able to tell if you're doing them right or not because I don't care. But feel free to practice. Just make sure that you've got some type of citation somewhere. Again, there are many things I care about, and that is not one of them. I guess the last thing, put your name in your document. The only weird thing I have pet peeves about is I hate having to rename documents. I don't know why, it really frustrates me. It's a personal failing that I should probably work on with my therapist, but I don't know why it bothers me so much, but it really just something about having to rename 75 documents just destroys my soul. And so because of that, just include your name in it. I don't care as long as your name is in it. And so I can just like quickly see who it is. And I don't have to go like, oh, because otherwise you end up with 44 papers, like final papers. And it's like, whose final paper is this final paper? Blah, 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 blah. All right. I think those are the only tips and tricks I wanted to bring up. Grammar, spelling, blah, 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 blah. Oh, one other one. I never follow my own advice on this one, but I should. It can't hurt to read it out loud one time once you're done. It can be really helpful to read something out loud just because you pick up on ungrammatical things. And by that, I don't mean ungrammatical, but things that don't make sense when you hear it coming in through your own ears that you wouldn't necessarily have picked up on a piece of paper. So for instance, I'm going to highlight, oh no, this isn't working. No, that didn't work. Let's see if I can get one here. I don't think that's how you spell maniacal. There we go. So if you look at this sentence, and this is just an example of, I would never take off points for this sort of thing, but it's just a good, clear example of why reading something out loud can make it easier to recognize when there's something wrong with it. So if you just look at this sentence silently, it looks completely fine to most people if you hadn't just watched me say it out loud. Or like seen me type it up. But the moment you read it out loud, you immediately realize there's two cats here. Maniacal cat, which you wouldn't necessarily have realized if you're not saying it out. So it can help you. Another useful one is if you read it out loud and you're reading a sentence and you get to the end and you're dying of lack of breath, the sentence is probably just a little too long and it would be hard for a reader to follow. So that's just another, and that's one that applies pretty universally to any sort of writing. All right, stop share. All right, this class has been recorded. So if you want to see this whole thing again, it's going to be going up tomorrow morning. I, generally speaking, let me bring this back over here. I will be again, there are things I care about on papers and spelling, grammar, those sorts of things I'm not going to care about. So if you have any questions at any point about anything in the paper writing process, feel free to ask me. But again, for those who came in late, I've moved, if you haven't done the outline assignment yet, it has been moved to Thursday at 9 a.m. Get it to me, I won't take off any points. Also, if you need to turn in the thesis assignment because you haven't done it yet, get that in by the same time, and I'm going to take off 10 points, not be able to give you feedback, but a 90 is a lot better than a 0. Lastly, if you want to grade me, still the same email address, and I'll probably be emailing everyone out most of this information again tomorrow. Just
that's aside from what they sent in the.
no, it should be the same thing. It's the same thing. It's just they send it so. I mean, here's the thing. How many of you see the from Baruch and just immediately put it in the trash folder? Like we all do it. There's so many of them. Like
for so long, and I forgot to upload my vaccine for
exactly. Exactly. That's the thing. You get so many. It's like the boy who cried wolf. Like you tell me 70 times, like, did you hear about this random talk on a thing that you're completely uninterested in? Oh, and by the way, here's your mandatory thing where we're not going to give you a job again if you don't fill it out. It's like, God, why can't you make them clear? Last thing, and for those of you who came in late, class on Thursday is going to be conducted even extra, mostly focused to online. We're probably going to talk for like 20 minutes. All right, everybody, you are free to go. Get out of here. I will be posting this stuff in the morning. Computer people, have a good night. Human people, have a good night.